afternoon to all our viewers. I'm Nohad. You're watching the English newscast on Future Television. These are today's top stories. Interior Minister Nohad Machnouk emphasizes the importance of all-inclusive talks as Lebanon struggles with problems associated with the Syrian conflict. Russian President Vladimir Putin says his Syrian counterpart Bashar al-Assad tells him he is ready to talk to armed opposition groups if they are genuinely committed to dialogue. At least 42 people, most of them the elderly, killed when a coach collided with a lorry and caught fire in southwest France. This is the country's worst road accident in 3 decades. We begin today with Interior Minister Nohad Machnouk. While he is emphasizing the importance of all-inclusive talks as Lebanon is struggling with problems associated with the Syrian conflict. Dialogue is part of civil peace in Lebanon, Machnouk said following a meeting with Speaker Nabih Berri at his Beirut residence. Today, he said, we need to stick to a civil peace even more so than before. He underlined that talks with Berri tackled the February security plan put forth for the Bekaa Valley, as well as ways to enhance internal security forces' roles at the various levels. He did admit that the plan that was designed to crack down on outlaws in the northern sector of the Bekaa had been a failure. Hezbollah has accused the government of failing to provide sufficient security in the Bekaa after a series of violent shootings in recent weeks resulted in different deaths and injuries. United States Secretary of State John Kerry is at the Hotel Imperial in Vienna ahead of the Mideast talks scheduled today. During his busy day of talks in Berlin, Kerry voiced cautious hope that there may be a way to defuse Israeli-Palestinian violence that has killed 60 people this month alone. Speaking to reporters after about 4 hours of talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Kerry said he thought there were steps that could reduce violence and said they needed to be discussed with Jordanian and Palestinian officials. At least 14 civilians, nearly half of them children, were killed in airstrikes on a flashpoint town in central Syria. 6 children and 5 women were among those killed in the aerial attack on Talbise in Homs province, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. Its head, Rami Abdelrahman, said that the air raids were believed to have been carried out by either Russia or the Syrian regime, both of which have been conducting airstrikes in the area. Moscow has been carrying out raids throughout Syria on what it says are Islamic State jihadist group targets since September 30th. Russia's Air Force has been backing ground operations by the Syrian army in the coastal province of Latakia. Russian President Vladimir Putin says his Syrian counterpart Bashar al-Assad has told him he is ready to talk to armed opposition groups if they are genuinely committed to dialogue and to combating Islamic State. Speaking a day after Assad made a surprise visit to Moscow for talks with Putin, underlining Moscow's new role as a central player in Syria's conflict, Putin said the two men had talked about the need for a political solution. Some Western governments have portrayed Russia as an obstacle to the political deal, especially since it started airstrikes on ISIS groups in Syria that are opposed to Assad, including some backed by the United States and its allies. But Putin says he believes that the military operation in Syria could create the right conditions for progress in talks on the future of the country. Coming up next, British singer Adele makes her much-anticipated return with Hello, her new single. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching the English news here on Future Television. Palestinian factions called for a day of rage demonstrations after prayers as a Palestinian stabbed and wounded an Israeli soldier in the West Bank Etzion Bloc Jewish settlement. This is according to the Israeli military. It said before being shot and wounded by other troops at the site. Israeli media said the attacker was a 16-year-old, but there was no confirmation from Palestinian officials. Many of the Palestinian assailants in almost daily stabbing attacks in Israel, East Jerusalem and the West Bank have been teenagers. One of the worst waves of street violence in years has been triggered also by Palestinians' anger at what they see as Jewish encroachment on the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem's Old City, Islam's third holiest site, which is also revered by Jews as the location of the 2 ancient temples. Hamas, the Islamist movement which controls the Gaza Strip, called in a statement on angry Palestinians to take part in the mass rallies at the Friday Day of Rage, a new confrontation against occupation soldiers. At least 42 people, most of them elderly, were killed when a coach collided with a lorry and caught fire in southwest France. This is the country's worst road accident in 3 decades. The coach was carrying a club of elderly people on an excursion when it collided with the lorry near the village of Puisseguin among the vineyards of the Saint-Emilion region east of Bordeaux. Many of the victims were thought to have died in fire, according to emergency workers and local authorities in the department of Gironde. Images shown on French television show the coach as a charred shell that had been entirely burnt. The driver of the coach was thought to be among the dead. The rest of the victims are passengers on the coach, and the crash is the deadliest in France since August 1982, when 53 people, including 44 children, were killed in a motorway pileup. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is deflecting harsh Republican criticism of her handling of the deadly 2012 attack in Benghazi, Libya, and urging her questionnaires in Congress to put U.S. national security ahead of politics.
You know, I would imagine I've thought more about what happened than all of you put together. I've lost more sleep than all of you put together. I have been racking my brain about what more could have been done or should have been done. And so when I took responsibility, I took it as a challenge and an obligation to make sure before I left the State Department that what we could learn, as I'm sure my predecessors did after Beirut and after Nairobi and Dar es Salaam and after all of the other attacks on our facilities, I'm sure all of them, Republican and Democrat alike, especially where there was loss of American life, said, okay, what must we do better?
We're going to get to that in a second. Now, before you give Mr. Blumenthal too much credit, you agree he didn't write a single one of those cables or memos he sent you.
I'm sorry, what?
He didn't write a single one of those cables or memos.
I don't know who wrote them. He's the one who sent them to me.
Would you be surprised to know not a single one of those was from him?
I don't know where he got the information that he was sending to me.
Did you ask? You're sending me very specific, detailed intelligence. What is your source? That seems to me like a pretty good question.
I did learn later that he was talking to or sharing information from former American intelligence officials.
By the name of? Who wrote those cables?
I don't recall. I don't know, Mr. Chairman.
You had his information passed on to others, but at least on one occasion you asked Ms. Abedine, can you print without any identifiers? Why would you want his name removed?
Because I thought that it would be more important to just look at the substance and to make a determination as to whether or not there was anything to it.
Well, don't people have a right to know the source of the information so they can determine credibility?
But he wasn't, as you just said, the source of the information. But
you didn't know that, Madam Secretary, and that's what you just said.
No, Mr. Chairman. I said that I knew that he didn't have the sources to provide that information. I knew he was getting it from somewhere else. He knew a lot of journalists, he knew others in Washington. It could have been a variety of people.
Well, if you're going to determine credibility, don't you want to know the source?
Well, it wasn't credibility so much as trying to follow the threads that were mentioned about individuals. And as I already stated, some of it was useful and some of it was not.
Well, did the President know that Mr. Blumenthal was advising you?
He wasn't advising me. And,
Did he know
Mr. Chairman,
that he was your most prolific emailer that we have found on the subjects of Libya and Benghazi?
That's because I didn't do most of my work about Libya on
I'm
email.
not challenging that, Madam Secretary. I am not challenging. All I'm telling you is the documents show he was your most prolific emailer on Libya and Benghazi. And my question to you is, did the President, the same White House that said you can't handle him, can't hire him, did he know that he was advising you?
He was not advising me, and I have no reason to have ever mentioned that or know that the President knew that.
U.S. President Barack Obama says that Black Lives Matter movement is raising a legitimate issue by African Americans being treated unfairly in certain communities.
Black Lives Matter is a social media movement that had tried to gel around Ferguson and the Eric Gardner case and some other cases that came up. And very rapidly, it was posited as being in opposition to the police. And sometimes, like any of these loose organizations. Some people pop off and say dumb things. But and on the other hand, though, it started being lifted up as these folks are opposed to police and they're opposed to cops and all lives matter. You know, so the notion was somehow saying Black Lives Matter was reverse racism or suggesting that other people's lives didn't matter, or police officers' lives didn't matter. And whenever we get bogged down in that kind of discussion, we know where that goes. I mean, that's just down the old track. So let me just suggest this. I think everybody understands all lives matter. Everybody wants strong, effective law enforcement. Everybody wants their kids to be safe when they're walking to school. Nobody wants to see police officers who are doing their job fairly hurt. Everybody understands it's a dangerous job. When I think the reason that the organizers used the phrase Black Lives Matters was not because they said they were suggesting nobody else's lives matter. Rather, what they were suggesting was there is a specific problem that is happening in the African American community that's not happening in other communities. And that is a legitimate issue that we've got to address.
British singer Adele made her much-anticipated return with Hello, her first single in more than 3 years. The singer and songwriter had tweeted this week that her new album, her first since the 2011 Grammy Award-winning 21, would be called 25, to coincide with her age. It is set for release on November 20th. Her new ballad begins with the lyrics, "Hello, it's me," and shows off her soaring vocals in the chorus. When she wrote it, she said she knew that this would be the first thing that everyone heard. She told this to the BBC Radio 1 breakfast show with Nick Grimshaw, where the single debuted. It's a very intimate song in terms of a topic, and it's very conversational, she added. In the track, Adele sings about calling a former lover to apologize for breaking his heart, and the sepia-tone video shows her in a dusty house in the countryside as she tries to get back in touch with him. Adele has won 6 Grammy Awards for 21, which included the hit Someone Like You, and an Academy Award for the theme song for the latest James Bond film, Skyfall, which was released in 2012. And the much-anticipated new James Bond will be released next month. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. Interior Minister Nohad Machnouk emphasizes the importance of all-inclusive talks as Lebanon struggles with problems associated with the Syrian conflict. Russian President Vladimir Putin says his Syrian counterpart Bashar al-Assad told him he was ready to talk to armed opposition groups if they were genuinely committed to dialogue. And at least 40 people killed when a coach collides with a lorry and catches fire in southwest France. This is the country's worst road accident in 3 decades. TJIF to all our viewers. We hope you enjoy your weekend, and we'll catch you again for all the latest tomorrow. Have a good one.